Today's episode is brought to you by 𝐬𝐻&BUCKLEY Law Firm. Smart business owners recognize that sound legal advice is critical to future success. The attorneys at 𝐬𝐻&BUCKLEY have been providing legal guidance to families, business owners, and C-level executives since 1997. From employment law and compliance issues to buying, selling, or merging companies, the corporate attorneys at 𝐬𝐻&BUCKLEY advise businesses across a wide variety of industries and professions. Over the years, co-founders Andy Kelleher and Dave Buckley have assembled a team of highly skilled attorneys to create a full-service law firm. I've gotten to know and have done deals with Andy Kelleher, Dave Buckley, and their team. They are truly a full-service law firm with outstanding talent. To find out how they can help you protect your assets and your future, contact them at kelleherbuckley.com. That's KELLEHERBUCKLEY.com. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you.
Looking to buy, sell, or grow your business to position it for a sale? As the owner and managing partner of Sun Acquisitions, Dominic Rinaldi has personally been involved in over 300 M&A transactions. He has seen and done it all, consulting with large and small businesses across a broad range of industries. On M&A Unplugged, he'll interview buyers, sellers, and their advisors about their experiences scaling, selling, and acquiring businesses. On every episode, you will get key learnings, but most importantly, you will be better prepared for your own acquisition or sale. This is M&A Unplugged with your host, Dominic Rinaldi.
I love when I meet attorneys who bring a practical approach to deal making. M&A Unplugged community, Joel Ankney of the Ankney Law Group is just that type of attorney. Joel has been practicing law for over 28 years and during that time has helped countless people buy and sell businesses. He graduated first in his law school class at William & Mary. He has written 2 books, Here's the Deal, Everything You Wish a Lawyer Would Tell You About Buying a Small Business, and Before You Leap, What a Lawyer Wants You to Know About Starting a Gig Economy Business. In fact, the University of Illinois Geist School of Business uses Joel's Here's the Deal book in its Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition class. Joel, welcome to M&A Unplugged and looking forward to discussing some of your practical advice today.
Dominic, thank you for having me on. I'm really excited to talk to you.
So, Joel, just for the M&A Unplugged community, if you could give us a quick backgrounder on yourself and what you've done, and then I'm excited to get into some of the practical advice that you offer in your Here's the Deal book and how you approach helping clients get through their deals.
Sure. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. My father was a small businessman. My grandfather was a small businessman. I decided to go to law school because I wanted to work with people like my father and my grandfather. You already went over that I have a psychology degree from Brigham Young, a law degree from William & Mary. After I graduated from William & Mary, I practiced for 3 years at Hunton & Williams. I actually did environmental law because the economy was not doing very well and they couldn't put me on their transactional team at the time. I then switched over to another law firm, Mays & Valentine, which later merged into Troutman Sanders, and worked there for about 9 years doing transactional work, intellectual property work, and even some entertainment law projects. I started my own law firm in 2003. I am purely a transactional attorney. I help people buy and sell businesses, start and operate businesses, and negotiate just about any type of contract. And yeah, over the years, I've had a lot of fun working and representing people, helping them buy or exit businesses. And I really try and approach my work with them as a counselor, somebody who can walk beside them through the process.
Joel, I would imagine that your undergrad in psychology really helps you quite a bit in the practice of law, helping people through transactions. Because as an M&A advisor for many years, I find that the psychology aspects of what I do sometimes outweigh the technical aspects of what I do.
Well, and I I like to think that it does help me. One of the things that I learned from my father is that his clients were loyal to him because they trusted him. And so I think that, my background in psychology helps me build that trust with my clients.
Yeah, that's tremendous. So what led you to write Here's the Deal? How did you get to the point where you said, I think this book would be relevant?
A couple of things led me to that. One of the things that led me to that was that I had perceived myself for many years as being a startup attorney, not so much of an M&A attorney. And I had a son who was preparing to go to college. And so during the summer before he left, I had him work on a research project where he reviewed projects that I had done for the first 10 years of my solo law practice. And what we discovered is that the bulk of my work doing those deals, many of my clients, first of all, were doing deals for the first time. In other words, they weren't serial dealers, I guess, or serial investors or serial M&A people. So anytime they came in to see me, this was a new experience for them. And what I observed is that many people thought either the buying or the selling of a business was an event, when it really was a process. And I wanted to write the book to help people learn about the process of doing a deal. And more so because what I had seen was that, by not understanding that it was a process, many people were surprised about things that happened during the process. And I don't like it when my clients are surprised. And so I wanted to have essentially a guidebook or a handbook that they could use to, as we went through the process together. It really does and has helped the relationships that I've had with my clients. As I give them a copy of the book at the beginning of deal process, it's really helped them and also helped us, improve our relationship.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. I couldn't agree more with you that this really is a process. And the thing that I talk to my clients about a lot is you really need to do the proper preparation. And if you really prepare, you're better likely to, have a good outcome and understand that, like you said, it's not an event. It doesn't happen overnight. There's lots of steps along the way. So that said, I think there, as you and I talked, you outlined 4 points that, from a lawyer's perspective, they're not legal in nature, but you bring all of that experience to these 4 points. And I think they were just so relevant. And I'm hoping maybe we can spend some time unpacking those 4 items. So I think the first one on your list was you'll pay more than the purchase price, which is, something that is a stark sort of comment, right? For people, what do you mean I'll pay more than the purchase price? What are you getting at there?
Well, I'd like to kind of just address something you said about these 4 points, where you said, they're not really based in the law. They're not really legal points, but a big part of what I do, and you probably do a lot of this too, I'm sure you do, is that we're really project managers a lot of the time as we work through this process. And so even though these might not have, be directly founded in the law or based in the law, they're obstacles or challenges that I have to help my clients get through. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So the first point is, you're right. A lot of people are surprised about the fact that they're going to need more money. They're going to need to bring more money to the table to buy a business than just the purchase price. And that extra money that they're going to need is going to be used to pay for a number of different things that are going to happen as they prepare for closing.
Can you give us some examples there?
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly, if you're buying certain types of businesses, you're going to need and going to want inspections done. You might want an environmental site assessment done. You might want somebody to come in and inspect the integrity of a building or of the equipment that you're purchasing. So you're going to have to hire some people to come in and do those things. You may even be required by the bank, for example, and if you're buying a business that includes a building and a facility and some real estate, and you're going to get a bank loan, the bank is certainly going to require you to do some sort of environmental due diligence on that property. And, that can be, when you hire people to do those types of inspections, that can add thousands of dollars to the cost of your deal.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And thousands can be underestimating it, right? I mean, depending on, especially when you start to get into inspections, when it relates to a building, you could start with a phase 1, but if there's something found in a phase 1, you might have to go to a phase 2, and you have issues around, who has to pay for that? Is it the buyer or the seller? Sometimes those are shared costs, but those numbers can really rack up very quickly and become a significant part of the overall cost of the deal.
Absolutely. And you're right. I'm being conservative when I say thousands. It could be, on the higher end of thousands, not the lower end. But some other examples also include, the professional fees you're going to pay. What are you going to pay your attorney? What are your legal fees going to look like? Usually, I'm always hand in hand with an accountant, with an accounting firm as we walk through these deals. And so you're going to have your professional fees to your accounting firm as well, to your CPA. You're also, if you're getting a loan from a bank, the bank is going to charge you money for that loan. You're going to have to typically pay an origination fee, pay some points on the loan. And surprisingly to most people, you're going to pay the bank's attorney's fees as well. And that surprises a lot of people as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great point.
I was just going to say a couple of other quick examples. If there are leases involved, there may be some transfer fees that have to be paid to the landlords to transfer those leases. Those costs are usually pretty low, but they're still there. And then finally, again, a fairly low cost, but typically you want to set up an acquisition entity like a limited liability company to take the assets. And so there'll be some costs associated with that as well.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And I think it's very wise advice that people understand that, they've got a pot of gold. And while the chunk of that could go to their equity into the deal, they need to keep some aside for all of these other hidden costs, because lots of these things you can't finance through the transaction. You, of course, could get a working capital line and use that for some of these items, but then you could be depleting the capital that you need to run and operate the business. And that's something that I often see is people will use their working capital lines to cover some of these unexpected costs that could leave their business in a precarious situation if they don't have enough in that working capital line.
Well, and I love that point, and that's a point that I wasn't really intending to talk about, but you're absolutely right. I mean, that working capital, that post-closing working capital is also, it's not really a cost, but it's something that you have to plan for, because, and you're right, if you try and eat into that working capital to pay some of the closing costs, you could put yourself kind of, in jeopardy going forward. So that's a great point.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, when we see businesses get into trouble, it's typically because they completely underestimated what they needed in a working capital line, or what kind of powder they needed to keep dry. Just because they're new to the business and they're trying to figure it out, or rainy day, like we're experiencing right now with the COVID crisis.
Yeah, I agree. And another thing that I typically see is that a buyer may think that they can rely on the revenue stream, and that revenue stream of the business is going to have an immediate impact the day after closing. In other words, they think, okay, all I got to do is get the closing, and then the business will essentially support itself after closing. And that's not the case typically.
That's exactly right. Well, so speaking about money, the next sort of surprise that you have on your list is, how you're going to finance the transaction and what's involved there and what people may overlook in regards to that.
Yeah. And I think that, what surprises people a lot is how long it takes to get the money in hand. That, getting a bank, whether it's a bank loan and even more so, if you're using some sort of you're trying to roll over your retirement, like to use like a self-directed IRA or a ROBS, a rollover business startup approach to this, to roll over your 401k, or, those things take a lot of time because there are a lot of hoops that you have to jump through to get that money in your hand for closing. And that's what's, I think, surprising to a lot of people is, at least a lot of people that I work with, is just how long it takes and the number of hoops you have to jump through to get that money for the closing.
We see that time and time again, especially if you're a smaller business and you're doing an SBA loan. People think that they go through underwriting, and once they're done with underwriting, it's done. But in reality, they're only maybe halfway through the process, even after they get an underwriting approval, because the second half of that is now the closer for the bank gets involved and they have to do all their closing checklists, and a third-party appraisal has to be acquired. And that takes weeks. And so, people think that underwriting is the finish line, and it's, maybe you're at the 50-yard line.
I agree. And I'm glad you brought up SBA loans because they are a lot more involved than just a commercial loan from a bank. And a lot of people, again, are surprised. And the reason why they are much more involved is because there's a regulatory process that overlays the whole transaction of, the whole loan transaction. And, it relates back to that first point as well. An SBA loan can actually cause you to incur more costs than a regular commercial loan.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, and there are pluses or minuses, right? As we both know, with an SBA loan, you get a longer amortization, a lower interest rate. With a regular commercial line, your amortization is going to be much shorter and a higher interest rate, but no personal guarantee typically on a commercial loan, but definitely a personal guarantee on the SBA loan. So trade-offs there, but understanding all of these things and going through all of it goes back to your point about it will take much longer than most people realize to really figure out the right way to finance a transaction and what's involved, and then getting through the process itself.
Absolutely. I mean, I did a transaction last year where we probably spent close to 6 months trying to sort through the different financing opportunities. And I had my buyer had a very solid credit background, but he was looking for some specific tax treatment on the financing. And so it took us quite a while to kind of work our way through. I think we did 3 different options that we looked at. And, because of the complexity of each option, it took us a long time. And that meant that we actually had to push closing back, I'd say I think we closed 3 or 4 months later than we had initially anticipated closing.
Which you and I both know, being transaction people, that's never a good thing, because anytime you introduce delays in the deals, that could be a death march in lots of ways, because all sorts of things can go sideways when you introduce delays into a deal.
Yeah, I mean, even in that particular deal, the seller was very patient with us. And so we weren't really at risk so much with the seller, but the business was actually a seasonal business. And so the longer we pushed the closing back, that meant that my buyer was not getting as much advantage from the seasonal aspect of the business as he had first hoped. So we kind of, instead of entering the season at the beginning, we kind of entered the season in the middle. And that again, that's a little thing that a lot of people initially might not think about.
Yeah. That could be significant dollars. And goes back to the working capital issue that we just talked about. Now you might need more working capital than you otherwise might have needed if you bought it at the beginning of the high season.
Yes. Yes.
So, Joel, let's go into number 3, which is about legal documents and people underestimating how much is really involved and what needs to happen in order to be protected, so that when you buy a business, you don't have aha moments later on that are going to cost you significant dollars potentially.
Yeah, I think for a new buyer, they may feel like the only legal document that's really in play here is maybe a letter of intent. I do some deals that don't have letters of intent, but also just the purchase agreement. They think that's going to be the only document involved here. But from my perspective, like you said, I'm trying to protect my client. And so I'm looking to do a couple of different things, and I need different legal documents to accomplish those objectives. So for example, one of the things I'm trying to do is to make sure that we're actually getting title to all of the assets. And so I may need several different types of documents to bring title to those assets into my buyer. For example, I might need a bill of sale. If there are vehicles or equipment titles, I'm going to need all those vehicle and equipment titles. If there's a lease or multiple leases, I'm going to need a document to assign those leases to my buyer. One of the things that I see people overlook frequently is if there's intellectual property to be transferred, like trademarks or copyrights to software, or even trade secrets like the secret sauce, the secret recipe. A lot of times that may be mentioned in the list of assets in the purchase agreement, but there's not a document to actually transfer title to those assets into the buyer. So those are just some examples of one thing I'm looking for is how am I going to get title into my buyer?
Yeah. And you also mentioned some other, ancillary documents, but critically important, right? Promissory notes and personal guarantees. And you have a lot of other agreements that could come into play depending on the structure of the deal. And I think you're absolutely right. People completely underestimate what's involved there. And each one of those is a separate negotiation as well.
Oh, absolutely. And you're right. When you talk about one set of legal documents is the agreement. Another set of legal documents is going to be how am I going to get title to assets into my buyer. And then another set of documents are going to relate to the financing itself. And that can be broken down into, if the seller is actually offering some seller financing, there are going to be documents related to that. And then if you've got a commercial lender, you're going to have a separate packet of loan documents for that loan as well. And so, yeah, I mean, it can be a lot. It can be hundreds of pages, and clients sometimes aren't real happy with seeing, stacks of documents, but they're necessary.
Yeah, and I would imagine that from time to time you get clients, because I know we hear this from clients, from time to time. Look, guys, what's the bare minimum I need? I don't want to overspend. I have to be careful. And, you walk a fine line here because you try to explain to them, look, this might be painful and it might be a higher number than you thought in all these documents, but it could save you hundreds of thousands on the other side. How do you work that through with clients when, I'm sure they want to minimize how much they're spending on the legal side, but they could be saving hundreds of thousands somewhere.
That's an interesting question. And it goes to what I like to tell my clients is that one of the things they're hiring me to do is to be a filter for them. So, yeah, I mean, I do have clients who have limited budgets, for example, and they're leaning on me and looking at me to help them prioritize, what issues do we really have to address and what issues are perhaps, we're willing to either not address them as hard or just bypass them and take a small risk when we do with that. And so that's a big part of what what my role is in a transaction as well, is to be that filter to help them understand and educate them on what the most significant issues are and how we're going to resolve them. And perhaps some of the other issues that, if we're really crunched for money or time, maybe we just decide to take the risk and move forward without resolving them.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Anything else before we move on to the last point?
Well, I as we were talking, one of the things that's kind of dear to my heart, because it's typically when you're a young attorney at a big law firm working on transactions, one of your first types of assignment is usually to help with the disclosure schedules on a purchase agreement. And that, that helps a young attorney learn the importance and significance of the representations and warranties in the purchase agreement. And when you're the buyer, working through the reps and warranties and the disclosure schedules with the seller during negotiation is part of the due diligence process and part of the risk assessment process. And so, I've had buyers who kind of don't fully understand why we spend so much time on reps and warranties and disclosures. But once I'm able to show them the importance and the value of the information that we're getting out of the seller, again, that helps them understand that, just like you said, there are a lot of promises that are being made. And if a promise is broken, or if a promise doesn't have a solid foundation, that can cause a lot of trouble and expense for a buyer after the closing. So it's good to dive into that stuff, and it takes time. And that's what, again, it's part of that process, but it's something that I educate clients on quite a bit.
To that point, Joel, do you have your clients actually get involved in the assembly of those disclosure statements? Do you find that if they're involved in it in some way, shape, or form, that it highlights that for them? Or is it more you recommend that they closely review what is produced?
So if I'm representing the buyer, it's more of the latter. I typically don't have them involved at the beginning of that process. But I do try and take some time at the beginning of that process to explain, what we're going to be doing, why we need to do it, and how long it's probably going to take. And then as I receive information from the seller, yes, I absolutely am sharing that with my buyer and asking them to review it as part of the due diligence process.
Got it. And so moving on to your last point, which I think is just very well taken, it's going to take you longer than you think.
Well, and that's kind of the umbrella statement, I guess, for this discussion. I have had clients come in and with relatively small transactions, maybe $1 million to $3 million, and tell me they want to close in 2 weeks. And as I ask them questions, and I've learned, rather than tell them, hey, this is going to take longer than you think, I typically will ask them a series of questions like, are you getting a bank loan? Is there a lease involved? Are you looking to get some seller financing? What kind of due diligence have you done? Have you had your CPA look at the financials yet? As I ask those questions, they come to a realization. I hope I kind of lead them down the path to that realization that 2 weeks is going to be, we can do it. Frankly, I have turned around deals quickly, but you take a lot of risk when you don't give me enough time to protect you. But, again, I try and ask the right questions to help them come to their own realization that, it is going to take some time to get through this.
And on the seller side, what's your advice on the seller when somebody's looking to sell? Because they also tend to think that, once they put their business on the market, okay, great, this will be sold and, we'll be off to the next venture, whatever that is, in short order. What are you helping the sellers think through there?
Yeah, really from the seller side, there's so much less to do typically. And so I try and educate them on what the buyer is going to have to go through so that they can understand that there are going to be times when I'm going to ask them to be patient because the buyer has a lot more things to do than the seller typically has to do. And a lot of the things that the buyer has to do is going to, they're not going to have a lot of control over the timing of it when they're dealing with a lender, for example, or a landlord. They're going to, that timeline is going to be affected by outside people. And so, with a seller, what I'm asking them to do is to understand, put themselves in the buyer's shoes a little bit, understand what the buyer's doing, and to have patience and to realize that from time to time, the buyer is probably going to ask us for more time for one thing or another.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll say one of the things that we do with sellers quite a bit is we try to prepare them ahead of time for diligence and what's going to be involved in diligence. And even to the point where we ask them to assemble data rooms before they even go, we get out onto the market, because even when we get ahead of the curve like that, there's still so many documents that a seller has to produce for the buyer that if they don't do that work ahead of time, it will really grind down the process once a buyer does come to the table and make an offer. So we'll try to do our level best to get sellers to populate a lot of that information very early.
And I love that idea. And I have worked on 2 or 3 deals in the last year or two where I've represented the buyer and the seller has done just that. They've actually created a virtual data room so that when the letter of intent is signed, we get a link emailed to us to that virtual data room, and it's full of documents. And we generally ask for more, but we're off to a great start because they've done that prep.
Yeah. Yeah. Joel, I think this is tremendous. As I started off in my intro, I think this is really good practical advice that I think people need to hear. And I love that it's coming from an attorney because you see so many deals and look, the legal stuff is the legal stuff and you've got the experience to handle that. But it's all these other things that people don't anticipate that can really throw them off. So as we're wrapping up here today, any high-level comments or final thoughts that you would like to share with the M&A Unplugged community?
Well, that's a great question. I love doing deals because I love the, perhaps like you say, the non-legal aspect of it. I love the relationships that I create with my clients, the interaction with opposing counsel, because we're all typically pointed in the same direction. We're all trying to achieve something for our clients that's going to benefit them. We're trying to build something rather than perhaps tear something apart. But I do like people to be educated, to know that, to at least have a general understanding of what the process is going to be like, and that it is going to be difficult at times, but also to understand that, because I'm on their team, I'm going to, I'm always at bat for them. I'm going to help them filter issues. I'm going to be able to tell them what I think is customary and reasonable and perhaps what they, shouldn't spend a lot of time and anxiety on. And in the end, it is a process that can create a lot of anxiety for people, a lot of stress. So a lot of times I just like to tell my clients, hey, look, I'm not sleeping at night so that you can sleep at night. I'll take on a lot of the stress and the anxiety for you so that you can focus on your business and focus on preparing for the transaction.
That's great. That's great. Well, Joel, I really appreciated you visiting us today and sharing all this great information. If folks wanted to reach you, how could they get in touch with you?
It is easy to get in touch with me. You just need to search my name, Joel Ankney. It's very unique and unusual. And I have a website for my law firm that is simply my name, 𝐿ankney.com. That's the easiest way to find me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on some other platforms as well, but the website's probably the easiest way to find me. And it has all my contact information on there too.
And folks, Ankney is spelled Ankney. Joel, thank you again. Really appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. Dominic, it was wonderfully fun. I enjoy swapping ideas with you.
That's great. So, folks, let me just recap a few things that Joel brought up, which I think is just really great reminders if you're looking at a transaction. First, if you're looking to buy, you will pay more than the purchase price. There are so many other things that have to be covered in the transaction that you need to contemplate. And being prepared and understanding what those are really matters. It will take you longer to secure the money than you think. And there are lots of places to go secure the money. So understanding all of your options and weighing those options ahead of time will really put you in a better position to do the deal once you find the right one. You will need more legal documents than you think. I see this time and time again in every transaction. And if you hire a good M&A attorney with a lot of experience, somebody like Joel Ankney, he will cover your back. They will know what is necessary, what's needed, because the last thing you want to do is shave $1,000 off of your legal bill to find out that you overlooked something so critical and it cost you tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands later on. And overall, it will take longer to buy a business or sell a business than you may think. It just takes time. And not every deal that comes together gets done. You have to restart and go to the next deal or go to the next buyer. And so you just have to be prepared that this is not an overnight process. All of today's information will be available in the show notes. If you would like to learn more about the process of acquiring or selling a business, please visit our website at sunacquisitions.com or feel free to reach out to me at drinaldi@sunacquisitions.com. I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the M&A Unplugged podcast. And until then, please remember that scaling, acquiring, or selling a business takes time, preparation, and the proper knowledge.
Thank you for joining us today on M&A Unplugged. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and recommend it wherever you get your podcasts. If you want more great information on how to scale, acquire, or sell a business, please visit our website at sunacquisitions.com.